Well, hello, Connie. I'm Adam Cornegay, and this is July 1st, and I get the honor and privilege to interview you on behalf of ASET.
And I'm
All
looking
right,
forward to it.
you ready?
Yep.
All right. First question. Can you name when and where you received your credentials, and where do you currently work?
So I received my EEG T June 1991. I'm number 2192 and did my oral boards in Fort Myers, Florida. I received my registered in evoke potential May of 1995. I'm number 528. And I did my orals in Chicago. Lou Cole is actually one of my examiners, had me so nervous I thought I was going to just throw up. I received my CNM December of 2006. I'm number 74, took it in Detroit. Decided to take the first round because I had this horrible fear that the Irwins out of Duke were going to require us to do some kind of oral practical exam. So I took my exam with Doctors Vern and H.B. Calder sitting behind me and Martha Coyne sitting next to me on my left side, which needless to say was extremely intimidating. Vern was done in 45 minutes and HB swore through the whole study. So my CLTM I received in 2009. I'm number 32 and I did that here in Gaylord, Michigan. Currently I'm a travel tech. On hiatus for a little bit of time. President and co-owner of Innovative Group Incorporated, maker and co-developer of the electrode puller. So that's what I'm doing with my time along with my ASET volunteer work.
That's fantastic. So what drew you to the neurodiagnostic profession?
So when I was 4 years old, I had a head injury and a couple of years later started having blackouts. I went to Catholic school and the nuns weren't very happy because they always occurred during church. At that time, I had numerous EEGs done in Saginaw with that horrible bentonite paste. I could hear as a kid, I could hear the pen noise when I swallowed or I chewed. And at this point in time, knowing what I know now, I wish I could say I was sorry to the tech who ran my studies. I remember having hair down to my knees at the age of 5, and my mother had it cut because it was easier than dealing with the paste cleanup afterwards. I was on phenobarb for 4 years. There was talk of possible learning disabilities. And after that, I was always interested, but never really knew how to get the training. Got married, moved to Florida, trained in EKG and non-invasive cardiology. Wanted to learn echo, which was just coming out. My boss told me it was a dying art. I didn't want to do that. I think it was just a way to get me into the EEG lab. So I was trained on the job. And in hindsight, not trained very well. Found out about ASET and ABRIT accidentally through mail that came to my lab while the boss was on vacation. A new neurologist came in and said he'd help me get registered. And after 3 months of training me on the job, told me in exchange for training his wife, who was also his office staff, to do his EEGs, he'd help me get registered. So I said, no, can't do that. Small hospital. While covering for a little neighboring hospital where the tech was on vacation, she was getting a new neon coding machine, and I met Jennifer Duramo, who had been a past ASET president here in Michigan, was very active with ASET. She was extremely kind, told me about a school in Tampa, which was the closest at the time. I lived in Kissimmee. So I interviewed there, went to school, and then once trained, I knew this is what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was 32 years old with 2 kids, a husband, and it was the best thing I ever did.
I love it. So was EEG a popular specialty when you first started?
You know, as a kid, I had no clue. I mean, I just assumed everybody had EEG in the lab, right? I had my first EEG in 1964, and we drove into town, but it wasn't a big deal. After I moved to Florida in the late 70s, the hospital that I was in was 110 beds, and they had a tech that came out of Orlando once or twice a week, recorded EEGs, took them back to the doctor to read. Eventually, they hired a respiratory therapist who had done tele-EEG in South Florida, and I trained under her. She took over for the registered tech, trained under her, did EEGs and pulmonary function testing, because neither areas were very busy, but the boss wanted to make sure he had enough coverage in case somebody was out or vacations. So we covered both areas. And in 1988, when I went to school in Florida, there were actually 3 accredited programs. So it was pretty popular, and Florida was pretty progressive. So, but now in hindsight, I guess it wasn't very popular. I don't think it still really is, right?
Do you recall who your early mentors were?
So in school, and I have to say that only because prior to that, I really didn't have, I mean, I had somebody who trained me, but I don't know if I'd really call her a mentor. Dee Sybeck was my clinical coordinator at St. Joe's in Tampa, and Vivian Porter was the program director. They were very influential, along with classmates there, Kamar, Kip, Anthony, and Celia Barreto. And as I progressed in my career, Doctors Vern Halson, H.B. Calder, Martha Coyne, Judy Ann Ewing, Dr. Tim Theuts, who I worked with at Butterworth Hospital, which is now Corewell in Grand Rapids, My boss there, Gina Watkins, my boss up here in Traverse City, Leo Lewinsky. And involving myself with ASET, I would say Elizabeth Mullican, Susan Agostini, Adam Cornegay, and Mary Bettinas. And I'm sure there's more and other ones. I mean, there were tons of people who influenced me, but they were probably the ones I refer to the most.
That's quite an impressive group of people you just mentioned. What are some of your earliest career influences?
Well, I think the biggest influential thing was always the patient. Once I went to school, I realized I'd done a few studies on people and didn't really know what I was doing. You know, I was trained with a styrofoam head laying next to the patient's head with all the markings and told, put them, just line them up and put them there, right? Nothing about prep, nothing about pace, nothing about cleanup, just that's what you did. I remembered my experience as a kid and how horrible my hair was when I got done and the fact that I had to have it cut. And I thought, I'm never going to do that to another person. So I think that's been probably the thing that's gotten me through most of my career is trying to put yourself in the patient's shoes. How are they feeling at the time?
Beautiful. If you had not become an EEG technologist, what do you think you'd be doing?
Well, initially after high school, I went to college to be a special education teacher. In my first year, I was extremely disappointed because we spent more time teaching students how to do the things that they were eventually going to be teaching students. So like my basic math for teachers was teaching supposed high school graduates basic math, and I was very disillusioned. So I ended up, after the first year, I just didn't go back to college, and I lost interest and started working retail. Ended up moving to Florida for job opportunities because the financial economy and things like that in Michigan were going bad in the late 70s. Got married and sort of fell into the job, and as they say, the rest is history. I think I was always destined to be in medicine. I just didn't know it yet.
So why do you think that this field took off?
Well, I think once there became more widespread knowledge, you know, it really wasn't used a lot clinically until the 70s, late 60s and 70s. And I think once there was more education for the physicians and the neurologists who were using it, and they saw the benefits of testing, they decided that, you know, maybe they could use it for more things. And so it got bigger and bigger, and then they started training people, and so then it got bigger and bigger too. When I started training, CAT scan had just started. MRI wasn't even in the picture yet. So EEG was done for a lot of things that it's not even used for now. When CAT scan came out, I was told that EEG would go by the wayside. And when MRI came out, I was told my job was going to be obsolete because they had MRI. And then when the auto recordings that Neon Coden had came out, I was told they wouldn't need an EEG tech anymore. And same with digital, right? That it was a dying career, but it didn't happen. If anything, it made it expand more and more and more. And now we're playing catch up.
That we are. Do you remember what equipment that you trained on and what the limitations were back then?
So I was trained on a Grass Model 816, so a 16-channel Grass machine. It had 3 master switches in the middle, and I was told not to touch anything else with those 3 master switches, or like I would destroy the machine. So I didn't touch anything. When I helped across town, she had, I think, a Model 6. It had the electrode switch panel was off the machine. It was mounted on the side. And she didn't do any portables at all because she said if she moved the machine, it went so out of whack, it took forever to get it straightened up. But I think it was just because she didn't want to do portables because the machine was actually smaller. It was only 8 channels. For the Model 6, you had to warm it up. It had tubes in it. You turned it on, you went for coffee, you came back 20 minutes later. The machines were very heavy. That one was actually bolted to the floor. I don't, everybody talks about limitations. I never had a problem with like the ink and the pens and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was because I was taught to really baby this equipment. You know, you took care of things and you did what needed to be done with it. Probably the biggest quote unquote limitations had to do with storage of everything, manipulating all of that paper around, put it in this room, put it in that room, put it in storage, put it out of town, microfilm it, throw it away, that kind of thing. But I think it also helped you be a better tech because you learned what was important, what montages you had to do, what electrodes you had to add, what you had to drop off, what you didn't have to, and how to make the patient do what you needed them to do because the noise would wake them up, right?
Yeah.
That's what I had when I was training.
Do you recall some of the other pieces of equipment that you used over time?
Yeah, in the analog world, it was, Neon Coden and Grass, Tekka, Nicolay, and Evoke potentials. I had a Nicolay CA1000 and then a 2000. I used Biologic, XLTech, Neon Code and Cadwell, Natus, Convumetics from in the digital world. Evoke Potentials, like I said, the Nicolay, Biologic, Cadwell, Viking, Nerve Conductions, Tekka, Natus. I did ambulatory reel-to-reel and cassette tape recordings with an old Oxford system and a scanner with the bifurcated and the single leads that were with a collar system that's what you use to attach it to the patient's neck so that it wasn't full of artifact. And then XLTech, Lifeline, Natus, and Cadwell. I think I've used them all the US-based ones.
When you were
intraoperative monitoring is mostly Cadwell and Biologic.
when you were using the equipment over the years, did you feel like there was negatives or cons to using some of that equipment, or did you just focus on the positives and what it could do at that time?
Well, I mean, there were, when you were using, so my first ambulatory system was a reel-to-reel system, and then the cassette tapes. And so naturally, if somebody put an ambulatory on and they didn't clean the clutches on those tape recorders, it would come back and the tape would be all messed up, right? Inevitably, as you were switching from one montage to the other, that's when your patient had a seizure or they would start it. And so you would miss it because you had to run a blank page so you could write on it for the doctor. So you'd turn it off for 10 seconds and then you'd change your montage real quick and you'd start again. And inevitably something would have started at that time, or the paper would catch or something like that. But then the positives on it is it taught you to be a better tech. It taught you to how to troubleshoot your equipment and how to change what you had to do. We didn't have biomed people then. I had a maintenance guy with a screwdriver that I didn't even need the screwdriver because Grass sent screwdrivers with all of their equipment. So if you had a problem, you called Grass, they told you how to troubleshoot it. If you needed a part, they sent it to you. You sent the old one back and the tech changed it out. You didn't have biomed. I didn't have a biomed guy until probably 1990. I mean, I was in the field a good 10 years before I even knew what a biomed guy was.
Wow.
So
Thinking about your training program, do you have any specific memories that kind of pop out?
Oh, tons. I started school when I was 32 years old. I was married, I had 2 kids, I had a husband, I had a full-time job, and I couldn't give up any of those things at that point in time and survive. So in my interview, I was told by a male physician, neurologist, who was also the lab medical director and the program director, that I would never make it because I was married and I had 2 children and I was working a full-time job. And it was just impossible to do. So we started the program with 8 students, spent 3 months doing head measurement and basic general medical training, went out on the floor with experienced techs. Since I had already had 5 years of clinical experience, I think they treated me a little bit different. I was doing things differently than the other students were. We had 5 women, 3 were over 30, and 3 men when we started. One of the days we were doing clinicals, the one fella did his first rotation. He went into the ICU and he came down halfway through the study and he quit school, picked up all his stuff and walked out. And he said he couldn't do EEGs on dead people. And then he became a paramedic, which we thought was just ironic, right? But he said they weren't dead yet, so he didn't worry about it. 2 of my very good friends from school, Kip and Celia, they kept me sane. I was driving 85 miles one way to school, driving back, and then going to work. And I was working 30 hours a week. 5 days a week, sometimes 6, to keep my hours up so I had the benefits at the hospital. They were supposed to be paying for my schooling. I got let go partway through my schooling. Kip and I were the same age, had the same number of kids and the same need to get a good career to help take care of our family. Celia was a little bit younger and her family became my godsend. I got hit broadside, T-boned in May of '89 on my way to school, rolled my van 7 times. Graduated in September. After a week or so of recovery, I got my schoolwork by phone every day with Vivian, and I lived on and off with Celia and her family for about 2 months until I could drive again and then go to classes. It was tough, but her family and Kip were wonderful, and I appreciate them. And we're still friends.
Amazing.
As a group, we would take our weekly terminology words and make up a story on this big chalkboard in the classroom. We had a story about a band called Sulcus Fisher and the Gyrette. And we would write these stories. We would write these little chapter stories every week using all of our words. And I don't know if anybody ever wrote it down, but we had so much fun doing that. It was such a riot. As we were going to graduate, Dee, who was a mentor to me, she became sick. And she and I had chatted because I had background experience in pulmonary disease issues. And she was starting to have some issue. She was diagnosed with AIDS, and she passed away right before we graduated, or right after we graduated. Her personal life was scrutinized due to the fact that she had AIDS, but once it was discovered how she contacted it through work, they sort of dropped it. And thank goodness now for HIPAA, because that would have never happened if HIPAA would have been around at the time. HIPAA and I graduated top of our class. We were extremely competitive, and in spite of everything, Vivian and her staff and were very supportive for all of us, and even with all of her issues, and even after we graduated. And one of my highlights was interviewing Vivian Porter and having her a guest of ours when we were in Kansas City. It was such a good time to see her.
So over time, in your opinion, how do you think that the field has changed over the course of your career?
Well, I think online education, computers, and digital EEG has been a great opportunity for a lot of people to expand their knowledge, right? And it's made our job easier and harder at the same time. Easier in the fact that you're not dealing with all of the technical stuff and the moving around and all of the heavy work. It's a little bit lighter and a little easier, but I think it also gives you a false sense of knowing it all, because you're not troubleshooting equipment like you were, and you're not having the mechanics that you did. You push a button and it goes, and if a doctor wants to change it, the doctor can change it. You don't have to as a technologist. An analog system can humble you really quick if you don't do something right, and depending on who your instructor was, they humbled you even more. Same thing when punching in montages. I think when you had the mechanics having to change a montage on the fly, it gave you a better understanding of how the 1020 system was set up and how it was constructed and why you did what you did, and if you had to change it, why you changed it. So you learned the whys. Now you don't learn the whys too much anymore. Now it's just do this, the doctor can change it when they want to.
So thinking about scientific knowledge, how do you think the scientific knowledge has changed the field? And what do you think are some major breakthroughs?
So I think in medicine in general, I think MRI changed tremendously what we knew about neuroscience and neurology. And digital EEG for our organization. Prior to that, we were sure, we had telefactor and we had, some ambulatory things, and you could do 24 hours of video recording and hope that the VCRs didn't fall apart and that your machine didn't lose power and, all those kinds of things. But I think once we went digital and we were able to do so many more channels, I think it just opened everything up for intraoperative monitoring and things like SEEG and epilepsy surgery and all of those things that were so minimal, back in the day. I mean, I did carotid monitoring on an analog machine, and if you weren't paying just so much attention to what the physician was doing, your machine was totally jacked if they hit the bovie while you were, holding on to something. So, but I think also by doing that, it's been exceptionally good for the patient. Now you can do things in the OR and the ICU, the ER, but I think at the same time, it's really strained the technical staff and physicians. And I think that's the thing that we're trying to play catch up on now.
So what do you think are 2 or 3 large issues in EEG or neurodiagnostics that we solve?
What's funny is as I was reading this question, I was thinking, I've been doing the HAC, the historical chair work now for about 10 years on and off. And I'm finding we have the same issues now that they were having when ASET started in 1959. And to me, that's sort of sad, right? To think that in almost 70 years, 65 years, we're still dealing with the same stuff. Short staff, lack of education, lack of training, lack of physician support. And I'm not saying for everybody, just sort of across the board. It depends on where you work. And it depends on who happens to be that physician in your lab. They're still talking about competency and salaries and credentials, and ultimately what's best for the patient, which has been ongoing for the entire time that EEG's been a field. A state licensure and the fact that most facilities that we work in have absolutely no idea what we do or where we're located or how well trained we are, especially physicians, especially neurologists. If you talk to a neurologist who's not part of your team and they ask you what you do and you start talking to them, they're just shocked. Some of them are shocked that you have the training that you have, even though it's very focused, that it's at the same level that they have it, sometimes not even more. And I think those are all things. I think from a physician standpoint, we have to get them more involved.
So in your opinion, what are some of the main areas of professional discussion or disagreement today?
My number one thing, I think, is the rapid EEG systems. I think there's so many people who are afraid of them instead of looking at them as a tool and trying to get involved with them. I blame some of that on the the manufacturers who seem to circumvent the neurodiagnostics field. They went to the ER docs, they went to the ICU docs and nurses and the hospital admins, and they sort of went around technologists instead of embracing technologists. I think it's a good tool to use in your lab so that you're not killing the staff that you have, which is, I think, why hospitals are having such a hard time keeping staff because of call and schedules. But I also think that physicians need to understand that that machine will never replace a good qualified technologist in a full EEG set. I don't care what kind of set you put on somebody, that person and that nurse who has to flip that person in an intensive care unit, especially, sometimes those systems don't stay on well. And so I think that's one of the things. Cross-training of non-EEG staff because of that is a big caveat. And so if I'm using the system now, do I need an EEG tech? Can I just do away with the lab and use this system on everybody? And that's where I think the neurologists need to come in and say, no, you can't. Respiratory therapists have to be registered, and because a lot of them do sleep, now there's a push again to train respiratory therapy people to cover the EEG lab. And when I was asked to do that over 30 years ago now, I took all of my school books into my meeting and sat down with the vice president and said, okay, here's all the books I used. Here's a tape measure. Here's a crayon. Here's a set of electrodes. When whoever we're training can put all these on a patient in 30 minutes and then run a 30-minute recording, a good quality recording where they have to sit in the room because they can't leave, especially for a 30-minute study. And they can identify when the patient's at risk and when the patient's having issues, then we can leave them on their own. I said, I've been doing this 10 years and I still don't know all this stuff. So, and he never brought it up again. So I think those are the big things. I think from a career side, I think in development, I think some of the things we need to start looking at is maybe, and for lack of a better word, a technical or vocational school approach initially. H.B. Calder told me one time, he said, I don't need a registered tech to put electrodes on. I need a registered tech to look at the data and interact with the patient. Anybody can put electrodes on. You can teach anybody in 3 weeks how to put electrodes on. They may not know what they're doing or why they're doing what they're doing, but they can do that. And so I think if we get people younger, sort of like they get these high school kids as med techs and phlebotomists early on, and then get them that job as an assistant, and then get them as a tech one, and then move them into school and get them then to come registered. I think it's only going to help us more.
What are you most proud of? Oh,
well, I think we missed licensure in the 80s and the 90s, and I don't see that really happening, but I don't think we give it away. I think we still have to work on just at least being recognized and being treated as the professionals that we are. It bothers me at some places that I've been to that the technologists, because they don't have to be credentialed, are techs, and they're at the same level as environmental services or cafeteria workers. And I have a problem with that. What am I most proud of? Well, my credentials and my education. Disappointed I didn't get a degree, but at the time there really wasn't much, and life just got in the way. But those things belong to me. Nobody paid for them. I did. I paid for all of them. No, I never was reimbursed. I never got compensated. It was all me. Influenced my kids to know how important their life path is for them to decide. Made a career that would support me and then myself and my children when I got divorced. And every job, even as a travel tech, taught me something.
Where do you see neurodiagnostics in 10 years?
Well, I think that there's going to come a point in time where we're not going to, as a technologist, we're not going to be working at the same capacity we're working now. I think that the head pieces will get better if we still need to use electrode pieces. Think of Star Trek, and Dr. Bones had this scanner that he scanned over you and it read your EEGs. There was an article in the ASET journal years ago about a group out of Japan who was working on that, thinking it would be held like on an ambulance or in a police car. And if they found somebody who was unresponsive, they would just scan it over their head and it would go transmitted to an emergency room, and they could tell if the patient was seizing or not. I think you're going to see something like that, whether it be some kind of a cap or a system of some kind for that. And then I think technologists, our role will change to be more of the reader, more of the data manipulator, for lack of a better word. Think CLTM on steroids, right? We'll be the people who'll be reading them and telling the physicians what we're seeing, and the neurologist won't even probably look at it. The only person who would look at it would be an epileptologist or somebody doing surgical interventions. And it'll be that next step credential that whether it be a PA level or an electroencephalographer level or something like that. I think that's where we're going. And I hope that ASET's at the forefront of those changes. I hope that they are more proactive than reactive and sort of find that before it gets started. I think we're going there right now.
What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
So I actually have two. My teacher in fourth grade told me you can do whatever you want. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And she was a very wise woman. My boss up here, Leo Lewinsky, he told me he could teach at the EEG Tech and have them trained to do anything in an allied health profession just because of how they were trained. But that he couldn't take another allied health professional and have them do a quality EEG. And from a management standpoint, he was probably my biggest supporter. He had told me that he would have my back no matter what. He may not agree with everything that I did, but as his supervisor, manager person, he respected me and trusted me to make great decisions, and I appreciated him for that.
Is there anyone else in electroencephalography that you think would be beneficial to talk to?
Oh my gosh. So as the ASET HAC chair, I have a list. We're doing all the past presidents. Dr. Hans Luters, Keith Kappa, Dr. Ojim, Dr. Rich Vogel, Dr. Jeff Balzer, Faisal Gary, I know I was going to mess up his name, Dr. Tatum, Dr. Jaskowski, techs like Kathy Bouldry and Patty Baumgardner and Brett Netherton. And, there's so many more. I just, like I said, I have this ongoing list and I add to them as I come across people, and I'm now sharing them with part of the members to hopefully get these people interviewed.
Who are the prominent electroencephalographers who should be documented?
Well, other than the doctors that I previously spoke of, I would like to see more from the field of intraoperative monitoring. I think that's still such a developing field, and I think we have so many people who are at the forefront for that. And I'd also like to see some write-ups on people like Drs. Alzheimer and Kreutzfeld and Penfield and Jasper and Jackson, that era people, the people who came way before us who started all of this. Because I don't think, especially from an EEG standpoint, that there's a lot of things that technologists have access to about them.
So if you could have a conversation with any neurodiagnostic related scientist, who would it be and why?
So my most favorite person that I would love to be able to chat with again was Dr. Ernst Niedermeyer. He would come to the meetings and he would sit with the techs and he would talk. And the first time I ever met him, he sat next to me and we were talking, and I asked him if he was a lecturer and he told me yes. And I asked him if he was a technologist, and he sort of smiled and he said, I have been. And then he got up from lunch and he lectured. He made me feel about, yay big. But he was such a pleasant guy, and I would love to talk to him again. He would be great. But I wouldn't turn any of the other ones down if they showed up at the door.
So shifting gears a little bit and thinking about your time as president of ASET, thank you for serving. In that capacity, what years did you serve?
So I was president-elect from 2017 to 2019. I served as president from 2019 to 2021, and past president was supposed to be from 2021 to 2022, but then the president at that time, Adam Cornegay, oh wait, he's right here in the room, changed the rules, and I served one more year till 2023. So now the past president served 2 years, which I think I think it's good for continuity, right? I think it was good. It was a good change.
So what do you think was your greatest accomplishment as president?
I had a couple, I think, when I started looking at this. So when I came in as president, as president-elect, I served with Susan Agostini and was very grateful that I was there working with her at the time because of some of the things that she was going through. In my tenure, I helped develop a better relationship with ABRAT, ACNS, AES, AANEM, and ASNM from what had happened prior to that. Started the International Members Task Force, which became the now International Committee, which is a co-committee with ABRAT and ASET. Changed the leadership for ASET in the executive office and hired the new executive director, and assisted in developing ASET's first virtual annual meeting. I couldn't pick one.
What do you think we can learn from experience?
Probably that everyone is human and makes mistakes. To learn to forgive, to learn to stay morally and ethically strong, even during times of adversity, and to know that sometimes things are bigger than yourself.
What advice would you give to a new board member?
Well, I think, and I don't know if ASET is doing this now, but I think to have a board mentor, someone who's either through the first year or is now in their last year of service, that can gently guide you in some of the ins and outs of ASET Things are a little bit different now than they were when I first started on the board, and I think it's for the better. But I think it can be very daunting, when you walk into it, especially if you don't have any past society chapter or organizational background for a not-for-profit. It can be very different. To get friendly with all of the board, not just those that you know or that you work with, and that your work is for ASET as a whole, not just a small group, and most definitely not for your best interest. That membership is watching you. Act professionally, show up, be a professional during the time that you serve.
What advice would you give to a new ASET member?
To attend a meeting, an annual conference. The virtual stuff is great and it's very easy, and it gives you access to things that if you're from, Kingsley, Michigan, you probably never would have access to. But the networking at a conference, that physical interaction and the camaraderie that's developed can't be gotten in a virtual platform. It's the conversations during the socials, it's the conversations at lunch, it's the conversations after the presentations that are better than almost some of the presentations. Then you have a network of people that you most likely will never have, they will never say no to you. If you contact them for any reason and ask a question, or you see them 5 years from now, you're just going to pick up just like you never stop chatting. And they'll be your first go-to if you find yourself looking for a job. You're looking to change careers, right? I never would reply to something in the newspaper. I would call somebody and say, hey, guess what? I'm looking for a job. When you can give back, someone helped you, and I think it's great for you to reach back and help. A, it's very educational, and B, someone helped you get where you were. So that's how people are going to get where they're going. And we're not just talking financially, we're talking through education or mentorship, or sometimes just somebody to bounce things off of. And then ultimately get involved, whether it be a local, regional, or national society. The skills that you learn through volunteering with these organizations and the networkings that you develop, it's free. And it can only help you in your career path, regardless of where that takes you. Even if it's out of neurodiagnostics, it's still going to help you.
What do you think are the elements, or what elements do you think are important to sustain a legacy?
I think learning from mistakes to make sure history doesn't repeat itself, to be proactive and not reactive, and to always be a step ahead and professional in every aspect of everything that you do.
I mean, we already asked, where do you see ASET in the next 5 years? We asked that.
But as a leader, I think
As a anyway.
Yeah, because I think
Right.
as a past president, I think you look at it as a past president different than you do as a technologist, right?
Okay. So
I
where do you
think
see ASET in the next 5 years?
I think hopefully still be the global leader for technologists with broader education and international presence. I think we have so much to learn from those who are less fortunate than us. Even in the US, I mean, there's still so many locations in the US that don't have access to the education, the knowledge base, the networking, and the mentorship. And I think they're being left behind because they're afraid to say something, because they didn't go to formal schooling and they work in a very small hospital and they work with older equipment, and they're not formally trained, and I think they're intimidated by ASET. And I think they're intimidated by the people in ASET. And so I think we're doing them a disservice, and I'm hoping that we'll reach out more to them. And then through the emerging markets and the international presence, I think there's a big need for a lot of people out there for us to help them. And I'm hoping that's where we go. And then I'm hoping from an AI standpoint, I think AI is going to make a big difference in everything that we do eventually. And I think it's going to have to be at the forefront for that. I don't think it's going to take a tech's place. I don't think it's going to take a physician's place, because I think machines are only as good as machines are, right? I think there's still going to need to be oversight, but I think it's going to be up to us to decide how that's used best.
Well, thank you for allowing me to talk with you.
Well, thank you for doing that with me. I appreciate it so much.
It's an honor to go down memory lane with you.
Oh, God. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good, right?